The fluorescent lights of Courtroom 3B hummed, a low, constant reminder of the gravity of the moment. My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed, and on that day, I stood before a judge and jury, prepared to offer the truth. A truth based on years of grueling study, countless hours in labs, and an unwavering commitment to justice. But in that room, my truth was merely a performance for some, a joke for others. I watched the jury's faces, a mix of curiosity and skepticism. My testimony was crucial. It wasn't just about a murder trial. It was about the integrity of an entire forensic process. My findings, detailed and irrefutable, pointed to a clear conclusion. The defendant, a young black man named Jamal, could not have committed the crime. The DNA evidence, the ballistics report, the fiber analysis, all of it pointed elsewhere. I began calmly, explaining the methodology, the scientific principles. I spoke of allele frequencies and trace evidence, of microscopy and chromatography. My voice was steady, my tone professional. I could feel the weight of Jamal's hopeful gaze from the defense table. He was a good kid, caught in a system that often cared more about convictions than justice. Then came the cross-examination. Mr. Sterling, the lead prosecutor, approached the podium. He was a man who exuded an air of inherited superiority, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his smile a thin predatory line. He didn't just walk, he glided, as if the courtroom floor existed solely for his elegant stride. "Dr. Reed," he began, his voice smooth as polished stone. "You come before us today as an expert, correct?" "That is correct, Mr. Sterling," I replied, meeting his gaze. My heart, despite my practiced composure, had begun to beat a little faster. This was where the real fight began. "And your expertise, Dr. Reed, stems from your academic background?" he continued, an almost imperceptible sneer touching the corner of his lips. "It does," I affirmed. "A PhD in forensic science from Howard University, followed by a fellowship at the National Institute of Justice, and 15 years of practical experience in the field." I listed my credentials with pride, each one earned through sweat and sacrifice. Sterling paused, letting my words hang in the air. He then turned slowly to the jury, allowing his gaze to sweep over them, as if sharing a private joke. "Howard University," he mused, almost to himself. "An excellent institution, I'm sure, for some." A ripple went through the courtroom. My jaw tightened. It wasn't a direct insult, but the implication was clear. Howard, a historically black university, was being subtly undermined. My qualifications, suddenly, were not universal. They were for some. "Are you suggesting my education is in any way inferior, Mr. Sterling?" I asked, my voice still even, but a cold fire beginning to stir within me. He chuckled, a short, dismissive sound. "Not at all, Dr. Reed. Merely establishing context. One does wonder if the rigor of certain regional programs truly prepares one for the complexities of a state-level homicide investigation." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the entire courtroom, the entire justice system. I knew this tactic. It wasn't about the science. It was about me, my skin, my background, my perceived place. "The principles of forensic science are universal, Mr. Sterling," I stated, pushing back, "and my published works in peer-reviewed journals, as well as my certifications from national bodies, demonstrate a comprehensive understanding and application of those principles." He waved a dismissive hand. "Publications, certifications. Splendid. But let's get to the evidence itself, shall we?" He walked over to a large monitor displaying one of my graphs. "This particular chart, Dr. Reed, purports to show a statistical improbability of the defendant's DNA matching the sample found at the scene." "It doesn't purport, Mr. Sterling," I corrected him. it demonstrates a statistical improbability that is so astronomically high, it effectively excludes the defendant. Effectively excludes, he repeated, mimicking my tone with exaggerated emphasis. He turned to the jury again, a patronizing smile on his face. And this, ladies and gentlemen, comes from a doctor whose primary experience, I understand, has been largely in environmental crime forensics. A rather different discipline, wouldn't you agree, Dr. Reed? The lie stung. My resume clearly showed extensive work across all forensic disciplines, including violent crimes. My environmental work was a fraction, a specialty I'd developed, but not my sole focus. He was twisting the narrative, manufacturing doubt. My expertise spans multiple forensic disciplines, Mr. Sterling, I countered, my patience fraying, as my curriculum vitae, provided to the court, clearly indicates. Ah, the curriculum vitae, he sighed dramatically, picking up a copy from his table. He skimmed it, his eyes darting across the pages, searching for something, anything, to latch onto. Yes, I see. A great deal of what seems to be grant-funded research. Not quite the same as real-world crime scene analysis, is it? Grant-funded research often directly informs and improves real-world crime scene analysis, Mr. Sterling, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. It's how advancements are made, how new techniques are validated. He chuckled again, louder this time. A few chuckles from the gallery joined in. My stomach lurched. The laughter felt like a physical blow. It echoed in the vast courtroom, diminishing not just my words but my very presence. Indeed, Sterling said, now directly facing the jury, completely ignoring me. Advancements, validation, or perhaps, Dr. Reed, is just a way to secure funding for labs that might otherwise struggle to remain relevant. The implication was clear. My lab, perhaps all labs run by people like me, were struggling, grasping for relevance, and cutting corners. He was painting me as a charlatan, and my science as a desperate attempt to stay afloat, not a pursuit of truth. I looked at the judge, hoping for intervention. Judge Thompson merely frowned, scribbling something on his pad. He offered no challenge to Sterling's racist undertones, no defense of my professional integrity. He simply allowed the performance to continue. Dr. Reed, isn't it true that the specific brand of spectrophotometer you used for the fiber analysis is known for its calibration inconsistencies? Sterling pressed on, suddenly diving into a highly technical detail. This was new. The lab used state-of-the-art equipment, rigorously maintained. No, that is absolutely false, I asserted, leaning forward. Our equipment undergoes daily calibration checks and annual certification by independent external bodies. There are no known inconsistencies. Perhaps not known to your lab, he retorted, a smirk playing on his lips. But sources, highly respected sources, have indicated otherwise. He didn't cite a source. He didn't need to. The seed of doubt was planted. He moved on, questioning every detail, every minute aspect of my report. He dragged out the cross-examination for hours, dissecting my education, my experience, my methods. Each question, each sneer, chipped away at my credibility, at my resolve. He never outright called me incompetent, but he skillfully led the jury to that conclusion. I saw Jamal's face. The hope in his eyes was slowly dimming, replaced by a weary resignation. My testimony, the one meant to save him, was being dismantled, not by superior science but by insidious prejudice and condescension. The judge called a recess. As I walked out, the faces of the jury seemed to hold a judgment already passed. I felt the heat of humiliation burning my cheeks. All my life, I had fought to be seen, to be heard, to be respected in spaces where I was often the only one who looked like me. And here, in a temple of justice, I was being reduced to an anecdote, a punchline. I remembered my grandmother's words from when I was a little girl. Evelyn, they'll try to dim your light, but you carry the sun inside you. Don't let them put it out. Standing in the quiet corridor, the noise of the court fading behind me, I closed my eyes. The cold dismissal, the casual racism, the orchestrated mockery, it all boiled into a fierce, quiet rage. They thought they had seen me. They thought they had dismissed me, but they hadn't seen the whole picture. Not yet. They hadn't seen the full badge. And that day, something shifted inside me. The fight for Jamal was no longer just about his innocence. It was about something far larger. It was about proving them wrong, about exposing the rot beneath the surface. It was about to become a very different kind of fight. The courtroom air, thick and heavy, pressed down on me. My words, each one a careful precision of scientific fact, seemed to dissolve into the stale silence. I could feel their eyes on me, not just the jury's, but the entire gallery's, and especially Mr. Sterling's. He was the defense attorney, a man whose tailored suit seemed to scream privilege. He smiled then, a thin, condescending line on his lips. It was a smile I knew too well, one that said, "I see you, but I don't truly see your worth." He began to dissect my testimony, not with logic, but with insidious implication. He spoke of my interpretations, as if they were whimsical guesses, not the product of decades of rigorous study. He questioned my methods, never directly, but by casting shadows of doubt. "A theory, Dr. Thorne," he'd say, "is not a certainty, is it?" I felt that familiar sting. It wasn't pain, not exactly. More like a dull ache in my chest, a cold, quiet anger that had been simmering for years, stoked by moments just like this. Memories flashed through my mind. Other rooms, other faces, dismissing my intelligence, minimizing my achievements, always underestimating the black woman at the table. It was the same script, just a different stage. I had meticulously presented the FTER spectroscopy results, clear, unambiguous data showing the chemical composition of the residue found at the crime scene. It linked directly to materials in the suspect's workshop, hard facts, but he twisted them, talking about common industrial compounds, suggesting my findings were nothing but coincidence. He leaned into the jury, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Anyone who's ever done a little DIY," he chuckled, "might find similar dust in their garage, wouldn't they?" The jury stirred. A few nodded. I saw the doubt take root, carefully planted by his performance. The judge, usually so sharp, remained silent. No objection from the prosecution, who seemed overwhelmed, or perhaps simply uninterested in defending my scientific integrity. When I explained the microscopic striations, the unique markings left by the suspect's modified tool on the victim's property, Mr. Sterling scoffed. It was a small, dry sound, but it echoed loudly in the quiet room. He whispered something to his assistant, and they both shared a private, derisive laugh. My breath caught. It wasn't from fear. It was a different kind of heat rising within me. This wasn't just about my evidence anymore. This wasn't just about this one case, this one verdict. This was about them, about the systemic dismissal, the ingrained arrogance, the way they weaponized ignorance to diminish truth. I kept my gaze steady, unwavering. My voice, against the rising tide of their contempt, remained calm. I continued to lay out the facts, one by one. Each truth, a stone in a wall they were so desperately trying to tear down. Mr. Sterling then cited alternative interpretations from a highly respected independent lab. He named Dr. Elias Vance, a so-called expert from a facility notorious for cutting corners and, frankly, for its questionable ethics, a lab I had history with. Vance's name alone was a red flag to anyone truly familiar with the forensic community. But to this jury, to this court, it was another expert opinion, presented as equal to mine. It wasn't a fair fight. My truth, meticulously gathered and presented, against their narrative, backed by power, prejudice, and a well-funded defense team. But as I sat there, enduring their sneers and the silent complicity of the court, a cold clarity settled over me. I wasn't just fighting for this verdict. I was fighting for every black professional who had been dismissed, every voice silenced, every mind underestimated. As Mr. Sterling displayed the conflicting report from Dr. Vance's lab on the screen, my eyes scanned the fine print, the dates, the methods, a subtle inconsistency, a missing calibration report, a detail only someone with my intimate knowledge of forensic standards would spot, a crack in their polished facade. The anger sharpened into a quiet, focused resolve, a surgical precision. They thought they were humiliating me. They thought they were winning, but they were only digging their own grave. I looked at the judge, then at the jury. They didn't see the full picture yet. They couldn't, but they would. Oh, they most certainly would. That quiet, insidious laughter in the courtroom. It was the sound of a new investigation beginning, one they would not see coming. The courtroom air grew heavy. Mr. Sterling, the opposing counsel, leaned into the microphone, his voice a practiced whisper of insinuation. He held up my CV, my years of study, my advanced degrees, my peer-reviewed publications. He held them, not with respect, but as if they were a curious, almost amusing anomaly. "Dr. Sharma," he began, his eyes sweeping across the jury with a practiced, confident gleam. "You've presented quite a definitive picture of compromised evidence. You spoke of contaminants, of improper handling, of protocols utterly disregarded. Yet, when one examines your own professional journey, your qualifications, they seem, shall we say, a touch unconventional." My spine stiffened. Unconventional. The word felt like a tiny, poisoned dart. It was a dog whistle I knew, a subtle code. It wasn't about my degrees. Not truly. It was about me, a black woman in a field historically dominated by others. It was the quiet accusation of affirmative action, of lowered standards applied just for people like me. I had heard it before, countless times, in hushed tones, in dismissive glances, in articles that questioned the merit of certain appointments. He moved closer to the jury box, his voice dropping, almost conspiratorial. "Tell me, Dr. Sharma, isn't it true your doctorate was earned from a relatively new institution, not one of the Ivy League titans we so often see gracing these expert witness stands?" The implication hung in the still air, thick and suffocating, that my knowledge was somehow lesser, that my rigorous training at a historically black university, renowned for its cutting-edge forensic science program, was not good enough. It was a place built on the foundations of excellence, often against the tide of systemic bias. I met his gaze, my own unwavering, though a fire began to kindle deep within me. My voice remained steady, a testament to years of practiced composure. "My institution is fully accredited, Mr. Sterling. My research has been published in leading international journals." He scoffed, a dismissive, loud scoff that echoed unnervingly in the hushed room. "Published, yes, but peer review, as we all know, can be subjective, especially in certain academic circles." He paused, allowing the unspoken, ugly implications to settle over everyone present. "And your early career, Dr. Sharma, it shows a series of remarkably rapid advancements, almost suspiciously so. One might wonder if these positions were more symbolic rather than earned on pure, unadulterated merit." My jaw tightened. My heart pounded a rhythm of quiet, contained fury. symbolic. He was openly suggesting I was a token, a diversity hire, parachuted into positions I hadn't truly earned, positions meant to check a box rather than utilize genuine expertise. The hot flush of indignation rose in my neck, a familiar burning sensation. I remembered my first mentor, Mrs. Elaine Johnson, a formidable black woman who had broken countless barriers. Her words, whispered to me years ago, echoed. Anya, they will always try to shrink you. Do not let them. Show them what you truly are, in your own time. He continued, relentless in his assault. In fact, Dr. Sharma, isn't it true that before this sudden, rather swift ascent, your work was primarily conducted in, shall we say, less glamorous departments, community labs, public defender clinics, places far removed from the pristine state-of-the-art facilities like the one whose findings you now so readily dismiss? He made community sound like a dirty word, like helping underserved populations, ensuring justice for those who couldn't afford top-tier experts was a mark of shame, a sign of inferiority. These were the places where I had truly honed my skills, where I had witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of injustice, where I learned to fight for truth with every fiber of my being, often against overwhelming, prejudiced odds. Each case was a lesson, each victory a quiet rebellion. A cold, heavy wave washed over me. This wasn't just an attack on my forensic findings, on my scientific conclusions. This was a visceral, calculated assault on my entire professional journey, on my identity, on the very essence of who I was and what I represented as a black woman in science. It was a pattern I knew too well. The subtle erosion of competence, the gentle yet insidious questioning of worth, all because of the skin I was in, the history I carried. I saw the flicker in the jury's eyes. Some looked deeply uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing the thinly veiled prejudice. Others, sadly, seemed swayed, their expressions growing more skeptical, buying into his smooth, venomous rhetoric. The seeds of doubt were being expertly sown, taking root in fertile ground. My client, a young black man falsely accused, shifted uneasily at the defense table. His hopes, his future, his very freedom rested squarely on my testimony, on my credibility. And Mr. Sterling was tearing it to shreds, piece by painful piece. The judge cleared his throat, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. Mr. Sterling, let's endeavor to keep the line of questioning relevant to the specifics of the case at hand. His tone was mild, too mild. It wasn't a rebuke, not truly. It was a suggestion, a polite request, an implicit allowance for the racist undertones to persist, to do their quiet, insidious damage. Sterling offered a saccharine, oily smile to the judge, a fleeting flash of false deference. Of course, Your Honor, merely establishing the witness's foundation, or rather, the concerning lack thereof. He turned back to me, his smile instantly fading, replaced by a predatory smirk. So, Dr. Sharma, after all this impressive, if somewhat rapid and unconventional career progression, you find yourself here, presenting evidence that directly contradicts the established findings of the state forensic lab, a lab with decades of reputable service, a lab whose team boasts individuals with far more traditional backgrounds than yourself. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the full weight of his contempt land. Are you suggesting, Dr. Sharma, that an entire team of seasoned, highly respected professionals with impeccable and conventional credentials somehow missed what you, the singularly unconventional expert, managed to find? Are you suggesting incompetence on their part, or something more, deliberate? The sneer in his voice was unmistakable, a sharp, cutting edge. He wasn't just questioning my science anymore. He was questioning my audacity, my nerve. How dare I, a black woman, challenge the established order, the white-dominated institutions, the traditional way of doing things. The blood rushed to my ears, a roaring torrent. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the immense pressure to remain composed, to not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break, of confirming their stereotypes. I took a slow, deliberate breath, drawing strength from an unseen wellspring. My gaze swept across the courtroom again, my client looking desperate, the jury, now a mix of confusion and suspicion, Mr. Sterling beaming with arrogant, unwavering confidence, the judge observing passively, a silent arbiter of this unfolding drama. They wanted me to crumble. They wanted me to admit I was wrong, or, worse, to unleash my raw anger, to become the angry black woman stereotype they so readily expected, thereby invalidating my every word. But I wouldn't. Not like this. Not here. I had walked this agonizing road too many times. The quiet condescension, the dismissive smiles, the subtle, lingering suggestions that I didn't truly belong, that my achievements were somehow tainted. Each time I had fought back with facts, with logic, with unassailable data. But this time it felt different. This time the injustice felt deeper, more insidious, more profoundly personal, and it was threatening to destroy an innocent man's life, a life hanging precariously in the balance. A different kind of resolve hardened within me, a cold, crystalline certainty. The rules of engagement had irrevocably changed. Mr. Sterling wasn't just playing hardball, he was playing dirty. He had crossed a line, a fundamental boundary of professional ethics and human decency. He had not only attacked my expertise, but assaulted my dignity. He had insulted every black scholar, every black professional who had ever been told they weren't good enough, or conventional enough, or Ivy League enough. My hand, resting on the polished wood of the witness stand, unconsciously tightened into a fist, my knuckles white. I looked directly at Mr. Sterling, his triumphant smirk, a mask of self-satisfaction. He thought he had won. He thought he had meticulously dismantled me, piece by agonizing piece. He had no idea what he had just truly unleashed. A quiet, powerful storm was brewing inside me. A momentous decision was forming, sharp, unyielding, and utterly clear. The time for polite defense, for mere rebuttal, was decisively over. It was time for something far more decisive, far more authoritative. He made one last, cutting remark, leaning close to the microphone again, his voice oozing with false concern. "So, Dr. Sharma, are we to believe that your unique perspective, your rather alternative approach, somehow makes you privy to truths that seem to elude everyone else? Or is it simply a matter of ambition outweighing actual evidence?" Ambition outweighing evidence. The ultimate crushing insult. He was implying I was fabricating my findings, twisting data, perhaps even lying, all for personal gain, for notoriety, for the sheer ego of proving an established institution wrong. He was suggesting my integrity was compromised, my very moral compass broken. That was the final straw. A cold, absolute clarity settled over me, chilling and empowering at once. He had given me no other choice. I met his gaze, my eyes unwavering, a quiet fire burning in their depths. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips, a curve he completely misunderstood. He saw defeat, a crack in my composure. I saw a beginning, the beginning of a reckoning. This wasn't just about this case anymore. This was about accountability. This was about justice, not just for my innocent client, but for every slight, every dismissive comment, every unconventional label thrown my way, every time competence was questioned because of race. My next move would be swift. It would be entirely unexpected, and it would shake this courtroom and that corrupt lab to its very foundations. The quiet Dr. Sharma they saw now, she was about to introduce them to someone else entirely, someone they had gravely underestimated. The courtroom doors swung shut with a muted thud behind me. I heard the lingering whispers, the barely concealed chuckles from the opposing team. Their faces, still etched in my memory, were a blur of smug satisfaction. Dr. Albright, the lead prosecutor, had even allowed himself a slight, almost imperceptible smirk as he gathered his papers. It was a practiced performance of dismissal. My mind replayed his words, dripping with condescension. The esteemed Dr. Evans offers an interesting perspective, Your Honor, but one clearly unsupported by the robust methodology of our reputable laboratory. The emphasis on our stung, implying a fundamental lack of rigor in my own work, solely because it challenged their narrative. I walked down the long, sterile corridor. Each step was a deliberate act of suppression. I felt a familiar heat rising in my chest, a burning coal of indignation. It was the same fire I'd felt many times before, in different settings, under different guises of injustice. This wasn't just about the case. It was about the insidious assumption, the casual disregard for my expertise, my experience, my very presence. They thought they had won. They thought they had humiliated me, pushed me back into the margins from which they believed I had dared to emerge. But they had profoundly miscalculated. They had poked a sleeping giant, unaware of its true nature. I reached the antechamber, a small, quiet space typically reserved for counsel. I pulled out my phone. My fingers moved with a practiced precision, dialing a number I rarely used. It connected after only one ring. "Agent Evans," a crisp voice answered. My other life. "It's me, David," I said, keeping my voice low, steady. "I need you to pull something for me." David was an old colleague, a man who understood the nuances of my dual existence better than anyone. He knew the difference between a casual request and a directive. "Anything, Dr. Evans?" he replied, sensing the shift in my tone. "I need a comprehensive audit history for the Sterling Forensics Lab. Every case they've handled in the last 5 years. Every analyst involved. Every piece of equipment calibrated." I paused, weighing my next words carefully. "And I need every detail on their accreditation process, including any pass flags, minor infractions, or even anecdotal reports of questionable practices. Dig deep, David. I mean, deep." There was a slight pause on the other end, a moment of processing the sheer scope of the request. "That's a significant undertaking, Doctor. Is this related to—" "Assume it is," I interrupted, gently but firmly, "and assume urgency. I need whatever you can get your hands on within the next 12 hours. Priority 1. "Understood, Doctor." "Consider it done." He knew not to ask further questions. He knew my capabilities, and he knew the gravity of any situation that would prompt such a request. I hung up, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. My mind was already racing, piecing together the next steps. This wasn't just about vindicating my testimony. It was about tearing down a structure built on hubris and prejudice. It was about exposing the rot beneath the surface of their reputable institution. I thought of the young defendant, a black man whose future hung in the balance, caught in a system that often prioritized expediency over truth, especially when black lives were involved. My initial objective was to ensure a fair trial, to bring scientific truth to light. Now, my objective had expanded. It had become a full-scale operation. I left the courthouse, the afternoon sun feeling surprisingly cool on my skin. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, deliberately, each step marking the transition from humiliated expert to decisive authority. The humiliation still simmered, a quiet fuel, but it was now overshadowed by a cold, unwavering resolve. I drove to my apartment, a quiet sanctuary that had witnessed countless nights of research, reflection, and the quiet burden of my responsibilities. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the semi darkness, the city lights painting faint patterns on my walls. My mind was a whirlwind of data points, legal statutes, and the faces of those who had scoffed at me, their laughter, their dismissive glares. They hadn't seen the badge. They hadn't seen the decades of relentless work, the battles fought in countless boardrooms and back alleys of justice. They hadn't seen the authority I carried, not just as a forensic expert, but as someone who commanded a far greater reach. I remembered the day I first received my full credentials, the weight of the badge in my hand. It wasn't just metal, it was a promise to uphold justice, to protect the innocent, and to dismantle the systems that perpetuated inequality. I had sworn an oath, not just to a job, but to a principle. This wasn't a personal vendetta. This was an activation, an intervention. The next morning, I arrived at court earlier than usual. The atmosphere was typical, bustling, lawyers in hushed conversations, the low hum of anticipation. I took my seat, observing the opposing counsel, Dr. Albright, and his team from Sterling Forensics. They looked confident, perhaps even more so after yesterday's perceived victory. Their smiles were wider, their gestures more expansive. I noticed a new analyst from Sterling sitting with them, a younger woman, looking slightly nervous. They must have rotated their expert witnesses, thinking they had me cornered. I watched their interactions, the casual way they spoke of the trial, as if it were a foregone conclusion. My phone vibrated discreetly in my pocket. It was a message from David. Preliminary audit complete. Data package. Sent securely. You won't believe what we found. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. I knew I would believe it. I always did. They had just given me all the justification I needed. My gaze settled on Dr. Albright one last time. He glanced my way, a fleeting look of triumph in his eyes, before he turned back to his team. He had no idea what storm he had just invited. The game, as he knew it, was about to change. I reached into my bag, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of a small leather case. It wasn't time yet. Not quite. But the moment was fast approaching when I would no longer be just Dr. Evans, the dismissed expert. I would be something far more significant, and they would finally learn the cost of their arrogance. The gavel fell with a final, hollow thud. The judge's words, a polite but firm dismissal of my expert testimony, still echoed in the courtroom's cavernous space. Dr. Thorne's opinion, while noted, lacks the direct demonstrable link to this specific evidence chain, as presented by the defense. It was a legalistic way of saying, "We don't believe you." Mr. Sterling, the lead defense attorney, a man whose tailored suits reeked of old money and unquestioned privilege, allowed a faint, triumphant smile to play on his lips. His co-counsel exchanged a discreet nod. Even Dr. Holloway, their star forensic expert, the man whose alternative findings directly contradicted mine, permitted himself a small, smug smirk from his seat at the defense table. They saw a black woman, a young one at that, whose carefully constructed scientific argument had just been dismantled. They saw another victory. They saw a minor inconvenience brushed aside. What they didn't see was the steel in my spine, forged through years of similar dismissals. They didn't see the silent internal shift that had just occurred within me. I met Dr. Holloway's gaze across the room. His eyes were cold, professional, yet held a hint of condescension. He thought he had won. He thought he had outmaneuvered me. I held his gaze without flinching. My expression remained neutral, unreadable. Inside, a quiet fury, cold and precise, began to hum, not for myself, not solely, but for every truth silenced, every expert ignored, every voice dismissed because of the color of their skin. My grandmother's voice, a soft whisper from the past, entered my mind. They will try to make you small, child. They will try to make you invisible. But your knowledge, your truth, it's a light they cannot extinguish. You just have to know when to let it burn. The judge called for a brief recess. The courtroom stirred, a murmur of subdued conversations, breaking the formal silence. My own legal team, a formidable group of advocates who had fought tirelessly for justice, looked concerned. My lead attorney, Mr. Jenkins, a man with tired but kind eyes, approached me, his brow furrowed with worry. "Dr. Thorne, I apologize," he began, his voice low. "We fought hard for your testimony to stand. We truly believed the weight of your evidence was undeniable." I gave him a faint smile. "It's all right, Mr. Jenkins. This was expected." His confusion was palpable. "Expected, but your findings were crucial." "Crucial, yes," I agreed. "But some walls need more than logic to crumble. Sometimes you have to find the master switch." He didn't understand. How could he? My true role, my full authority, was a carefully guarded secret, not just from the opposing counsel, but from nearly everyone outside a very select circle. It had to be, to maintain impartiality, to ensure the integrity of the investigations I oversaw. But today, impartiality was a luxury I could no longer afford. As people began to file out for the recess, Mr. Sterling paused near me. He leaned in conspiratorially, a practiced false humility in his tone. "A valiant effort, Dr. Thorne, truly. But forensics is a tricky business, isn't it? So many variables, so many ways to interpret the data." He practically patted the air in a gesture of dismissive sympathy. I simply nodded. "Indeed, Mr. Sterling. So many variables, so many ways to interpret or to mislead." My voice was calm, almost melodic. He chuckled, a dry, self-satisfied sound. "Precisely. Well, enjoy your recess." He swept away, his expensive cologne lingering in the air. I watched him go. He thought he was being clever. He thought he had just delivered the final blow. He had no idea he was dancing on the edge of a cliff. I found a quiet corner in the courthouse hallway, a rarely used alcove near the forgotten archives. I pulled out my secure communication device, a burner phone that looked innocuous, but was anything but. This was not a phone for casual calls. This was a phone for activation, for critical moments. My fingers, steady and precise, punched in a number, a direct encrypted line. It rang twice. "Director Hayes's office," a crisp, professional voice answered. The voice of Agent Miller, Director Hayes's chief of staff. "This is Dr. Thorne," I stated, my voice low but firm, cutting through the usual pleasantries. "I need to activate Protocol Phoenix. Immediately." There was a beat of silence on the other end, a pause that stretched, heavy with understanding. Agent Miller knew what Protocol Phoenix meant. It wasn't a routine procedure. It was a measure reserved for situations of grave injustice, systemic corruption, or threats to the integrity of the scientific and legal institutions we were sworn to protect. It meant a full, unannounced activation of resources, a swift and decisive intervention. "Understood, Dr. Thorne," Agent Miller's voice came back, devoid of surprise, imbued with a newfound urgency. "The team is already being mobilized. They're on standby. ETA 15 minutes. "Excellent," I replied, a cold satisfaction spreading through me. "Ensure they have full access to all evidence presented in this courtroom, and copies of every single testimony, expert and otherwise. Specifically, Dr. Holloway's prior publications and any internal lab reports related to his firm." "Consider it done, Dr. Thorne," Miller confirmed. "Anything else?" One more thing, I added. Ensure the media liaison is ready. This needs to be transparent. Every step. Understood. We'll be in touch. The line clicked dead. I tucked the phone away. My mind raced. Not with panic, but with calculations. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Their arrogance, their dismissal of my expertise, their blatant disregard for the truth. It all fed into the narrative I needed to build. They had given me every reason, every single one. I walked back towards the main corridor, my steps measured, deliberate. The recess was nearly over. The courtroom doors would soon reopen. I caught a glimpse of Mr. Sterling and Dr. Holloway, laughing together by the water cooler, their faces flushed with relief and triumph. Holloway was gesturing emphatically, no doubt recounting how easily he had debunked my findings. They thought they were celebrating their victory. They had no idea they were toasting their own demise. My path led me past a large polished brass plaque mounted on the courthouse wall, detailing the building's history. I paused for a moment, catching my reflection. My face was calm, resolute, but behind my eyes, a silent fire was beginning to ignite. The time for quiet appeals was over. The time for polite disagreement was past. The time for the slow, agonizing crawl of justice had been cut short by their hubris. Now it was time for the swift, undeniable hand of authority. I took a deep, steadying breath. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about truth. It was about justice. And it was about making sure that no one, especially not someone who looked like me, was ever dismissed again, simply because their truth was inconvenient to those in power. I subtly reached for my lapel, adjusting the small, intricately designed pin nestled there. It was almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. It was the official insignia, my badge, the symbol of my true office, my true power. Soon everyone in that courtroom would see it, and they would understand. The doors to the courtroom began to open once more. The usher called for order. It was time. Time for the next act. Time to reveal the true cost of their laughter. The room went utterly still. My words hung in the air, a solid, undeniable truth. The badge, now gleaming in the courtroom's harsh light, was not just metal and enamel. It was the weight of federal authority. The opposing counsel, Mr. Davies, looked like he'd seen a ghost. His face, usually so smug, was now a mask of pure terror. The expert from the lab, Dr. Sterling, who had chuckled dismissively at my data just minutes ago, had gone pale. His mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. My voice remained steady, a quiet force against the sudden, deafening silence. As Chief Investigator for the Office of Scientific Integrity, I began, letting the full title sink in. I am hereby initiating a full federal investigation into the practices of the Sterling Forensics Lab. A collective gasp swept through the public gallery. The judge, whose initial confusion had morphed into shock, now stared at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. He leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Miss Investigator," he stammered, "are you suggesting—" I met his gaze, my own unwavering. "I am not suggesting, Your Honor. I am stating. My testimony today, dismissed so flippantly, was not merely an expert opinion. It was a preliminary report, gathered under my official capacity, into a pattern of systemic negligence, potential data manipulation, and deeply ingrained bias that has compromised justice in numerous cases handled by Sterling Forensics, specifically cases involving defendants from marginalized communities." I saw Dr. Sterling visibly flinch. Mr. Davies, finally finding his voice, sputtered, "Objection, Your Honor! This is outrageous! A blatant attempt to derail proceedings." "On what grounds, Mr. Davies?" I asked, turning my gaze to him. My voice was calm, but there was an edge that cut through his bluster. On the grounds that I am exposing a truth your firm has willfully ignored and actively benefited from. The judge slammed his gavel. Order! Order in the court! He looked at me, then at Mr. Davies. Investigator, please proceed. Mr. Davies, your objection is noted, but this is a federal matter now. My courtroom, while important, will yield to the authority presented. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction, deep and silent. Years of being underestimated, of having my expertise questioned, not on merit but on the color of my skin, culminated in this precise moment. This wasn't just about proving I was right. It was about tearing down a system that thrived on injustice. My investigation began months ago, I continued, addressing the judge and the court, prompted by anomalies detected in several high-profile cases where sterling forensics provided the primary scientific evidence. The pattern was disturbing, data interpretation skewed, alternate explanations ignored, and crucially, a disproportionate impact on black and brown defendants. Dr. Sterling tried to interrupt. That's a lie. Our lab upholds the highest standards. Does it, Dr. Sterling? I shot back, my eyes locking with his. Does it uphold the highest standards when a lead expert laughs at a peer's detailed findings, rather than engage with the scientific method? Does it uphold integrity when it appears to cultivate an environment where dissenting opinions are not just ignored, but ridiculed, especially when they come from a black woman? His face went from pale to beet red. He had no answer. I held up a thick binder. I have here initial findings, detailed statistical analyses, witness statements from former Sterling employees, and internal communications that strongly suggest a culture of negligence and, yes, racial bias in how evidence is handled and presented. This dismissal of my testimony today, I swept my hand towards the defense table, was merely the final, glaring piece of evidence required to confirm the pattern. My next words were directed less at the court and more at the looming injustice that had tainted so many lives. Effective immediately, by federal mandate, all active cases involving Sterling Forensics Lab's evidence are subject to review. Furthermore, all personnel associated with the lab, including Dr. Sterling, are to cooperate fully with my office. Failure to do so will result in obstruction charges. Mr. Davies was on his feet again, but this time his protest was weak, his voice trembling. This is a witch hunt. This, Mr. Davies, I stated, my voice echoing with a quiet power, is justice. This is accountability for those who hide behind science to perpetuate inequity. For every black person wrongly accused, every family torn apart, every life unfairly ruined, because a system allowed its experts to operate with unchecked prejudice. I saw movement at the back of the courtroom. Two federal marshals, who I had discreetly alerted before my testimony, began to make their way forward, their eyes fixed on Dr. Sterling and Mr. Davies. Your Honor, I addressed the judge, I formally request that all evidence presented by Sterling Forensics in this trial be immediately sealed and transferred to my custody for independent re-examination. I also request a temporary injunction against Sterling Forensics Lab from handling any new cases, effective immediately, pending the outcome of our investigation. The judge, clearly overwhelmed but recognizing the gravity of the federal intervention, nodded slowly. Granted, he said, his voice quiet. All requests are granted. He then looked at the two marshals. Please ensure the investigators' requests are carried out. As the marshals approached the defense table, a visible tremor ran through Dr. Sterling. He looked utterly broken, his arrogance shattered. Mr. Davies slumped into his chair, defeat etched into every line of his face. The laughter, the dismissive looks, the patronizing tones, they were all gone, replaced by a chilling silence. This was not just a victory in a courtroom. This was the first seismic tremor in a much larger earthquake. I felt the weight of it, the enormity of what I had just unleashed. It was a heavy burden, but it was a burden I was prepared to carry. My thoughts drifted to my grandmother, a woman whose quiet dignity had always been met with dismissive smiles from the powerful. She would have understood this moment. She would have seen the quiet storm that had been brewing, waiting for its time to break. The battle had only just begun. The lab would fight back, lawyers would scramble, reputations would be destroyed. But for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was truly fighting on level ground. Or rather, I had just tilted the entire playing field. The truth, finally, had an army behind it, and that army was me. I watched as the marshals began to speak to Dr. Sterling and Mr. Davies, their voices low and authoritative. My gaze lingered on the face of the defendant, the young black man whose future hung in the balance. His eyes, wide with disbelief and dawning hope, met mine. A faint nod passed between us. He had been ridiculed, cast aside, just as I had. But tonight, things were going to be different. The real work started now. The meticulous sifting through years of tainted evidence, the interviews, the pushback from powerful institutions. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but standing there, bathed in the strange mixture of shock and quiet justice that now filled the courtroom, I knew I was ready. The doors of the lab, once so impregnable, were about to be forcefully opened, and what we would find inside, I suspected, would shake the foundations of more than just one injustice. This was just the beginning of the reckoning. The documents piled high, each page a chilling testament to a system that had protected lies, rewarded negligence, and thrived on a dangerous cocktail of arrogance and implicit bias. My team, a diverse assembly of relentless investigators, forensic accountants, and legal strategists, worked tirelessly, their faces grim but intensely focused. They understood the profound gravity of what we were unearthing. This wasn't just about one isolated misstep. It was about years, perhaps even decades, of deeply ingrained malfeasance. The initial internal review, which I had quietly instigated, had swiftly blossomed into a full-scale federal investigation. Subpoenas flew across the country like poisoned arrows, targeting every corner of the once esteemed Sterling Forensics Lab. The very name, which once commanded respect and fear in equal measure, now sounded like a hollow echo, devoid of its former luster, its credibility utterly shattered. I observed the unfolding drama from a strategic distance. My role had shifted from the expert dismissed on the stand to the architect of accountability, the head of the oversight committee, guiding the ship through treacherous legal waters. Every report that crossed my desk, every sworn affidavit that spoke of intimidation and falsification, every piece of irrefutable, deliberately manipulated data they uncovered, felt like a personal vindication, a quiet yet thunderous clap of justice against the casual arrogance that had tried so vehemently to silence me. Dr. Sterling himself, the man who had looked at me with such dismissive disdain, his eyes devoid of respect, was now a frequent unwelcome visitor to a revolving door of legal offices. His usual bespoke suits, once tailored to project an image of impeccable authority, now seemed to hang heavier on his stooped shoulders. The sharp lines on his face were no longer just the marks of age. They were deeply etched by gnawing fear, visible worry, and the crushing weight of his unraveling empire. The whispers reached me from every corner, not just in the hushed legal corridors, but from former colleagues, from sources I'd meticulously cultivated over years in the forensic community. Sterling's empire wasn't just teetering, it was in full, irreversible collapse. Key personnel, sensing the impending doom, were resigning en masse. Others, desperate to save themselves from the judicial avalanche, were turning informants, exchanging incriminating evidence for a chance at leniency. One afternoon, a sharp, empathetic junior investigator, Marcus, presented me with a binder. It was thick, heavy, almost pulsing with the weight of its contents. It detailed a horrifying pattern of confirmation bias that went far beyond mere human error or accidental oversight. This was systemic, deliberate. The lab, under Sterling's direction, had not only tailored results to fit predetermined narratives, but had overtly prioritized outcomes influenced by the race or socioeconomic status of the accused individuals. My blood ran cold, a familiar chill of righteous anger, even though I had intellectually prepared for this level of corruption. But to see it in black and white laid bare with irrefutable damning evidence was a different, far more visceral experience. The particular case I was initially involved in, the one where my meticulously gathered testimony was scoffed at and openly mocked, was tragically just the tip of a colossal, festering iceberg. The young black man, my original defendant whose life hung in the balance, had spent years in prison based almost entirely on Sterling's fraudulent expert analysis. His family, once utterly broken by the crushing weight of injustice and despair, now saw a fragile flicker of hope. I remembered their faces in the courtroom that day, their quiet, dignified despair, as my truthful words were brutally brushed aside. This wasn't just my fight, it was for them. The public outcry, once the meticulously guarded news began to inevitably leak, was immense and immediate, not directly through any action of mine, but through the relentless pursuit of truth by an increasingly emboldened investigative press, fueled by anonymous tips and the sheer, overwhelming volume of official documents becoming public record. People across the nation were genuinely outraged. They demanded concrete answers. They demanded swift, unequivocal accountability. The story of a black expert's dismissal leading to the exposure of widespread corruption resonated deeply. The ensuing court hearing was unlike anything I had ever witnessed in my extensive career. It wasn't a retrial for the original defendant. It was a preliminary hearing for unprecedented, sweeping charges against Sterling Forensics as an entire entity and against its senior leadership as individuals. Charges of pervasive professional misconduct, egregious obstruction of justice, and potentially outright criminal negligence that had demonstrably impacted countless lives. Dr. Sterling sat across the grand, imposing courtroom at the defense table. His renowned, once formidable lawyer, the very man who had questioned my credentials and implied my incompetence so aggressively, now looked like a mere shadow of his former self. His customary bravado had evaporated, replaced by a desperate, hurried energy, a flickering anxiety in his eyes. When it was time for testimony, a somber, steady parade of former Sterling employees took the stand. Lab technicians, junior scientists, even administrative staff who had once turned a blind eye. They spoke with varying degrees of reluctance and relief, recounting tales of immense, unethical pressure to produce certain predetermined results. They detailed warnings ignored, ethical breaches casually brushed under the rug, and a culture of fear that stifled dissent. Each voice, once silenced by fear of reprisal, now resonated with a raw, painful, yet ultimately cathartic honesty. I watched Sterling throughout. His eyes darted nervously, his jaw clenched so tightly it seemed painful. He tried desperately to maintain his composure, his facade of innocence, but I saw the telltale sweat bead on his forehead, the slight, involuntary tremor in his once steady hands. The man who had once exuded an impenetrable aura of untouchable authority was now visibly a prisoner in his own rapidly collapsing fortress. My turn came eventually, not as a witness in the traditional sense, but as the presiding head of the Federal Oversight Committee, the one leading this monumental charge. I stood before the formidable judge, my voice calm, steady, and impeccably clear. I meticulously detailed the methodical, painstaking process of our comprehensive investigation. I presented the irrefutable categorical evidence, piece by damning piece. I spoke of the devastating impact, the countless lives ruined, the families torn apart, the public trust utterly betrayed. I didn't need to raise my voice. The undeniable, meticulously gathered facts spoke powerfully for themselves. The carefully constructed web of deceit, so cunningly spun over decades, was now unraveling, thread by painful, incriminating thread, for all to see. The judge listened intently, her expression stern, bordering on outright condemnation. Her gaze, shifting between me and Sterling, revealed a profound understanding of the monumental implications of what was being laid bare. This wasn't just an unfortunate misstep, it was a fundamental, cynical corruption of the very bedrock of the justice system itself. Sterling's opposing lawyer tried frantically to interject, to dismiss my findings as a baseless, personal vendetta. His voice, once so booming and confident, now sounded reedy, desperate, almost pathetic. I simply met his gaze across the courtroom. There was no emotion on my face, only unwavering conviction. "This is not a vendetta," stated, my voice cutting cleanly and authoritatively through his pathetic protestations. "This is accountability. This is the pursuit of justice for every single individual whose life was irrevocably altered by biased, fraudulent science. This is about restoring fundamental integrity to a critical field that demands nothing less than absolute, unquestionable truth." The judge brought her gavel down with a sharp, resounding crack, silencing the desperate lawyer's objections. She looked directly at a pale, visibly shaking Dr. Sterling, then back at me, her gaze piercing. Her words were measured, deliberate, and heavy with the full weight of judicial authority. "Based on the overwhelming and incontrovertible evidence presented," she declared, her voice clear and strong, "and the meticulously documented pattern of systemic failures, fraudulent practices, and egregious unethical conduct within Sterling Forensics Lab, I find sufficient, compelling cause to proceed with a full legal indictment against the Sterling Forensics entity and its implicated senior leadership. This includes charges for multiple counts of professional misconduct, obstruction of justice, and a thorough review for criminal negligence." A collective gasp, a visceral ripple of shock spread through the courtroom. Not from me or my dedicated team. We had rigorously prepared for this precise moment, but from the Sterling camp, from the arrogant individuals who had, until now, truly believed themselves to be untouchable, beyond reproach. Dr. Sterling slumped heavily in his chair, as if the very air had been sucked from his lungs. The last vestiges of color drained from his face, leaving him ashen. His once proud empire was not just crumbling, it was being systematically, definitively dismantled before his very eyes. The man who had so casually dismissed my expertise, who had openly mocked my very presence and implied my inferiority, was now facing the full crushing weight of the powerful institution I had been quietly representing all along. I felt a profound, almost spiritual sense of partial closure, not of the entire arduous journey, for I knew much lay ahead, but of this particular, crucial battle. The searing humiliation in that courtroom, the bitter sting of their condescending laughter, it had not broken me. Instead, it had fueled an unquenchable fire, a fire for truth, for undeniable justice, for long overdue rectification. And now that fire was consuming them, burning away their edifice of lies. But I knew the fight wasn't truly over. An indictment, however monumental, was merely the beginning of a far longer, more complex process. The path to complete reform, to ensuring such an egregious breach of trust and ethics never happened again within our justice system, was long and arduous. There were still countless lives to restore, reputations to mend, and deep-seated systemic biases to painstakingly uproot from the very foundations of forensic science. As the judge concluded the session, her final words, resonating with a quiet authority, echoed in the suddenly silent, tense room. The pursuit of justice demands absolute, unwavering integrity from those entrusted with the tools of truth. When that integrity is compromised, the consequences must be absolute, swift, and uncompromising. I gathered my notes, the weight of the moment heavy in my heart, yet clear and resolute in my purpose. The next phase, the full trial, and the subsequent reforms would undoubtedly be even more challenging. But I was ready. I always had been. My quiet storm was just beginning its full sweeping force. The courtroom fell into an instant, petrified silence. My words, delivered with a quiet but unwavering force, resonated through every corner of the room. Under the authority vested in me by the Department of Justice, Bureau of Forensic Standards, I am initiating an immediate federal investigation into the practices of Sterling Forensics Lab, effective immediately. Dr. Sterling's face, moments ago flushed with self-satisfaction, blanched instantly. The color drained from his skin, leaving him looking like a spectral figure. His eyes, wide with disbelief and dawning horror, darted between me and the judge. The lead defense attorney, Mr. Davies, spluttered, his practiced composure shattering. "Your Honor, this is an outrage. Who is this woman? She cannot simply—" I didn't wait for Judge Thompson's inevitably dismissive interjection. My voice, though calm, cut through the rising murmurs and Mr. Davies' protestations. "I am Dr. Eris Thorne, Director of the Bureau of Forensic Standards Northeast Region." As I spoke, I slowly unclipped the badge from my waistband, holding it high for all to see. It wasn't just a simple ID. It was a weighty, gleaming symbol of federal authority. The gold seal of the Department of Justice, glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Judge Thompson, who had just moments before scoffed at my expertise, now looked utterly flummoxed. His gavel, which had been so quick to silence me, lay forgotten on the bench. He stammered, his usual authoritative tone replaced by an uncharacteristic quaver. "Director Thorne, I was not informed of your true capacity." "No, Your Honor, you weren't," I confirmed, my gaze steady, unwavering, holding his. This operation required absolute discretion, the highest level of confidentiality. For months, my dedicated team and I have been meticulously building a comprehensive case against Sterling Forensics Lab. We've uncovered a deeply disturbing pattern of systemic data manipulation, falsified reports, fabricated methodologies, and a blatant, egregious disregard for established scientific integrity. All of it, Your Honor, meticulously designed to secure convictions or acquittals based on illicit financial incentives rather than objective truth and irrefutable evidence. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, a wave of shock and disbelief. My client, Mr. Jackson, who had sat in stoic, defeated despair throughout the trial, now looked up, a raw, undeniable flicker of hope igniting in his weary eyes. His legal aid attorney, Ms. Chen, stared at me, her mouth agape, her earlier exasperation replaced by wide-eyed astonishment. "The case of Mr. Marcus Jackson," I continued, turning slightly to directly address the now trembling Dr. Sterling and the visibly unnerved defense table, "is, regrettably, merely the tip of a very large, deeply rotten iceberg. My initial testimony, which you so readily dismissed, Your Honor, was not a mere professional opinion. It was, in fact, an integral part of a controlled observation. It was deliberately designed to provoke a specific predictable response from Sterling Forensics, a response that would confirm, beyond any doubt, our deepest suspicions regarding the lab's fraudulent methodology and ethical corruption. Dr. Sterling, his face mottled, finally managed to find his voice, a choked, desperate, high-pitched sound. This is libel, a fabrication, a malicious conspiracy. My lab is above reproach. We are a pillar of forensic science. Your lab, Dr. Sterling, I countered, my voice hardening, devoid of any mercy, is now under immediate federal investigation. Every single report, every scientific finding, every piece of evidence processed by your facility for the last 5 years is being re-examined, cross-referenced, and verified by independent, unbiased experts. We have obtained comprehensive federal warrants. At this very moment, multiple teams of federal agents are securing your main offices, your satellite facilities, and systematically seizing all relevant data, hard drives, and financial records. The magnitude of my words seemed to hit Dr. Sterling like a physical blow. He swayed precariously, clutching the railing of the witness stand for support. His eyes glazed with utter terror. The lead defense attorney, Mr. Davies, began shouting, his voice rising in panic. "This is an ambush! This cannot stand! This is a violation of due process!" But it was standing. It was unfolding, irreversibly. A phalanx of federal agents, who had been discreetly waiting just outside the courtroom doors, now entered, their presence commanding, their movements precise and coordinated. They moved swiftly, purposefully, badges visible. One agent approached Dr. Sterling. Another handed official sealed documents to Mr. Davies, their eyes devoid of emotion. The air in the courtroom crackled with a new formidable authority that superseded all prior proceedings. Judge Thompson, finally regaining some semblance of control, weakly banged his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" But his voice lacked its usual conviction, its former power. He knew, instinctively, the immense gravity of what was unfolding. His own dismissive conduct, his blatant bias, would inevitably be scrutinized under the harsh light of a federal inquiry. I watched as Dr. Sterling, pale and trembling, was formally placed under arrest and escorted out of the courtroom, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. The man who had reveled in his supposed intellectual superiority, who had sneered at my qualifications, who had built his career and wealth on the agonizing suffering of countless innocent individuals, was now facing his own terrifying reckoning. It wasn't a quick, gratifying burst of anger I felt, but a deep, cold, almost serene sense of triumph. A justice meticulously engineered, painstakingly delivered. Over the next few weeks, the federal investigation unfolded with a breathtaking, ruthless efficiency. The revelations that emerged were not merely disturbing, they were staggering in their scope and audacity. Sterling Forensics had indeed built an entire empire on a foundation of meticulously crafted lies, manipulating everything from intricate DNA analysis to fundamental ballistics reports. Their insatiable greed had systematically corrupted the very bedrock of justice for an unimaginable number of individuals, both innocent and guilty. The media, initially caught completely off guard, soon erupted in a frenzy. Headlines screamed about forensic fraud uncovered, Justice Department launches unprecedented crackdown, and the whistleblower director who exposed it all. My name, Dr. Aris Thorne, became, almost overnight, synonymous with unwavering integrity, albeit one forged in a crucible of profound injustice and public scrutiny. The ripple effect of the expose was immense and truly transformative. Hundreds of cases previously decided with Sterling Forensics' tainted evidence were immediately thrown into question and placed under rigorous review. Defense lawyers scrambled to file appeals. Families who had lived for years with the agonizing weight of wrongful convictions found for the first time in memory a genuine glimmer of hope. those who had benefited financially from the fraud, like the wealthy clients Mr. Davies had shrewdly represented, now faced intense, renewed scrutiny and potential legal repercussions themselves. Mr. Davies himself, the epitome of the arrogant, dismissive attorney, was swiftly disbarred. His once illustrious career, built on sharp, often morally questionable tactics and influential associations, crumbled overnight into ignominy. He attempted to claim ignorance, to desperately distance himself from Sterling's crimes, but the overwhelming evidence of his complicity, his unwavering trust in the demonstrably fraudulent lab, despite glaring inconsistencies, was simply too damning to ignore. Judge Thompson faced a severe ethics investigation. While he wasn't directly implicated in the fraud itself, his blatant bias, his dismissive and contemptuous attitude towards my testimony, especially given his solemn professional obligations to ensure fair and impartial trials, led to severe repercussions. He was eventually removed from the bench, his long once respected career ending in profound disgrace and public humiliation. For Mr. Marcus Jackson, it meant the invaluable gift of freedom. His wrongful conviction was unequivocally overturned. The real perpetrators of the crime he had been falsely accused of were eventually identified and apprehended, thanks to the painstaking re-examination of evidence, now processed by ethical, truly competent forensic laboratories. When I saw him walk out of prison, a free man after years of unjust incarceration, the raw look of relief, gratitude, and profound new hope on his face was worth every sneer, every insult, every moment of calculated patience and enduring resilience. He shook my hand, his grip firm, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just save my life, you brought back my future. You gave me my life back." "I brought back the truth, Mr. Jackson," I corrected him softly, meeting his gaze. "And truth, though it may be delayed, eventually always finds its way. It always prevails." My work, however, didn't stop with the dismantling of Sterling Forensics. The Bureau of Forensic Standards launched a massive nationwide audit, meticulously rooting out other Sterling Forensics labs and similar pockets of corruption within the justice system. It was a long, arduous, and often thankless process, but it was absolutely necessary. We were rebuilding trust, one honest report, one ethical finding, one verifiable piece of evidence at a time. There were moments, late at night, when the immense exhaustion would finally set in. I'd allow myself to remember the condescending smiles, the patronizing tones, the casual way my words were dismissed, simply because of the color of my skin, because they assumed they knew my place, because they were blinded by their own prejudice. Those memories still held a sharp sting, a phantom ache, but now they were profoundly dulled by the quiet, deep, and utterly unshakable satisfaction of justice unequivocally served. My mother called me, her voice trembling with an almost overwhelming pride. "My Aris," she whispered into the phone, her voice cracking with emotion. "You always stood tall. Always, baby girl." I had proven them wrong, spectacularly so. Not with anger, not with aggression, but with absolute undeniable competence, with strategic intellect, and with an unyielding commitment to the truth. I had used their prejudice as their ultimate blind spot, allowing them to underestimate me, to confidently dismiss the very authority that would, in the end, unravel their entire corrupt world. They had indeed laughed at the black expert's testimony. They had openly mocked my credentials, my very presence. But I was never just an expert witness. I was the architect of their profound, undeniable downfall. And that day, in that hushed courtroom, I didn't just reveal a badge. I revealed the immutable, unyielding power of truth, the unbending strength of integrity, and the unwavering resolve of a black woman who, despite everything, refused to be silenced. Justice, though painstakingly slow in its arrival, had come with an undeniable resounding roar. The scales finally were balanced, and the echo of that balance would resonate for years to come.